Still think boots are just for mobility in Albion Online? It's time to catch up, because your boots do way more than just help you sprint. Depending on what you choose, you can reduce your cooldowns, debuff your enemies, restore energy or health, blink away from danger, or even swap places with another player. Boots affect how you engage, how you escape, how fast you rotate, and whether or not you survive in PvE and PvP. And depending on the content you're doing, the boots you choose can literally make or break your run. This is the final episode in my Albion Armor Breakdown series. We've already covered helmets and all the chest armors, where we went in depth on stats, abilities, how to use each gear piece, and what content they shine in. And today, we're doing the same for boots, the ability slot with the most crucial cooldown in your entire build. It's your panic button, your chase tool, your outplay potential, and your best shot at getting away when things go wrong. Whatever content you play in Albion, this guide will help you understand the real impact of your boots beyond the tooltip. Before we dive into the different boots in Albion, there are a few things you absolutely need to know about them, especially if you're newer, returning, or just never looked down at your feet and thought, wait, what else do these things actually do? Just like helmets, all boots in Albion Online give the same base defensive stats, and that catches a lot of players off guard. You'd expect plate boots to be tankier than leather or cloth, but that's not how it works here. In Albion, your boot armor type doesn't affect your defenses at all. What really matters is the ability they give you, and that's the only reason to choose one set of boots over another when building your setup. What does change the stats of your boots is their item power. That's affected by the boot's tier, enchantment, quality, whether it's an artifact and which type, along with your masteries and specialization levels, both in those specific boots and others within the same tree. Those levels actually boost the item power of other related boots, even if you're not using that exact piece. So what stats on your boots are affected by item power? You're looking at max health, max energy, health regeneration, and energy regeneration. That's it. These base stats stay the same no matter what type of boots you're using. They simply scale through item power. Just like helmets and chest armor, every boot line, plate, leather, and cloth comes with its own set of passive abilities. These aren't the main reason to pick a specific boot, but they can give your build a nice little bonus depending on what you're aiming for. Plate boots give you access to toughness, which increases your defenses, authority, which boosts your crowd control duration, and tenacity, which helps you resist crowd control effects. Leather shoes offer more hybrid style passives. Balanced Mind gives you a bit of everything: damage, healing cost, and defenses. Swiftness speeds up your auto attacks, and Quick Tinker reduces your cooldowns. Cloth Sandals lean more into caster style bonuses. Aggression increases your damage and healing, concentration reduces your cast times, and efficiency lowers your energy costs. Even though these passives roughly match the general theme of each armor type, tanky for plate, utility for leather, caster for cloth, you still don't pick boots just for the passive. The active ability on your boots is far more impactful, and that's what you should always base your choice on. Think of the passive as a bonus, not the main reason you're using the piece. There's also a second distinct feature that comes from your boots armor line, and unlike passives, this one actually can influence which line you choose. That's because each boot line comes with its own global active ability. All plate boots have Rejuvenating Sprint, which restores a portion of your health while sprinting. It's a very popular pick, especially in solo PvE and PvP, because having some extra sustain tied to your mobility is incredibly useful. All leather shoes have a Refreshing Sprint, which lowers your entire build's cooldowns while sprinting. This ability is widely used, since lower cooldowns means you can use your other offensive and defensive abilities more often. And all cloth sandals have Energetic Sprint, which restores a bit of energy over time while sprinting. If your build only needs a small amount of extra sustain, this is an excellent pick. It lets you free up other slots like your cape for different bonuses instead of energy sustain. All three of these sprint abilities are extremely popular and widely used. They work well in solo PvE, PvP, and across all types of group content. So keep these global abilities in mind when choosing your boot skill. They can play a huge role in your setup. Now, aside from each boot having its own unique ability and every boot line having a shared global skill, there's also one universal ability that can be found on every boot in the game, and that's Dodge. When you use Dodge, you dash towards your selected position and gain a shield for a short duration. This shield makes you completely immune to all damage, debuffs, and crowd control effects, while also giving you a slight boost to movement speed. It's a very useful ability in PvE to dodge heavy-hitting boss mechanics, and an excellent choice in PvP when you need to fully negate big enemy hits. So remember, on every boot in the game you have access to 3 different active abilities, and you can swap between them anytime you're out of combat. Now that you know everything about boots in general, it's time to break down each individual pair. What makes them unique, what they're good for, and when you typically want to use them. If you found the video helpful so far, make sure to give it a like and subscribe if you want more Albion content like this that helps you become a better player. Hey guys, welcome back to the final episode of the Armor Breakdown series. Today we're covering boots, and with that we will have covered all the helmets, all the armors, and complete this series. At some point, I will also go over all the capes, all the consumables, all the mounts, and after that, I'll even cover all the different weapon trees and individual weapons in the game as well. However, these things are going to require some time, as I also need to make a lot of other videos in between, such as build videos and economy videos. So if you want to be notified of everything, you know what you need to do. You need to hit that subscribe button. Alright, I went ahead and I put all these boots into different categories, and we actually ended up with, I'm counting here, 12 different categories of boots, which is a lot of different categories, I will say that. Now, before we start with the first category of boots, I want to emphasize that you will find yourself using the Armor tree line specific abilities, so Rejuvenating Sprint for the plate boots, the Energetic Sprint for the cloth sandals, and the Refreshing Sprint for the shoes, the leather shoes. You will be using these quite often. So don't sleep on these. These are very good. All 3 of them are very popular and widely used across a lot of different content, and they are really good abilities. Personally, I really am a fan of both the Refreshing Sprint and especially the Rejuvenating Sprint. Although it looks like this one heals for a little, don't forget that the healing scales with whatever stats you have going on in your build. So I have leather armor right now, which also gives some bonus to healing. Now, although it says here, let's equip it real fast just so I can show you. Although it says here, I will heal 108 health over 5 seconds. If we actually use this ability, you can see I'm healing 35 on every pop, which translates to 5 times 35, which is 165. No, 175. I failed on the quick maths. But actually, 175 instead of 108. And that's with leather armor. So basically, if I were to play these with cloth instead, where I have even more healing, these boots could just make for 10% of my max health every time they're off cooldown, which will be very helpful in both PvE and PvP content. From my own experience, the Rejuvenating Sprint saved me so many times, it just stays one of my favorite abilities for the boot slot. Nonetheless, as I waste my resistance pots, I will go over all the different abilities, and I will go over them through the categories I created for them. So let's start with our first category. Up first, we have the Soldier Boots, the Royal Boots, and the Demon Boots. And this is the category that I like to call Solo Mobility. If you are doing solo PvP content and you want to have high mobility in your kit, these are the boots you most likely want to take with you. Starting with the Soldier Boots, you have Wanderlust on it, which is an ability that stacks up to 8 times. Every stack of this one gives you 10% extra movement speed, At the max stacks, you will get a total of 80% movement speed. Now this buff lasts for another 7 seconds after you reach the max stacks, so in total it will last for 15 seconds. One thing you need to know about this ability is that it can be purged, and especially when you are starting with building up those stacks like this, you are still on very low movement speed, which is the crucial point where you are the most vulnerable against purges. But once you are at 7-8 stacks, you are very fast for another 7 seconds. The second boot with high mobility is the Royal Boots, and just like the Soldier Boots, this one also has some sort of stacking mechanic in that you march towards the targeted position, and for every stack that you build up whilst you march, you get an additional 9% movement speed. Now this one looks like this. You need to charge, so you can't really take any other actions whilst you are charging. But once you charge to the position you selected, you will basically have a huge movement speed boost for quite some time. Now this ability, just like the Soldier Boots, can be purged as well, so you have to be very careful, especially since with this one it's even more obvious as you are doing this animation whilst you are marching. And also another very important thing about this one is if you use it close to you, you will only get a couple stacks, which will look like this. So now I am at 4 stacks instead of 10, and as you can see, the movement speed buff isn't as impressive. Therefore, you have to be a bit more careful when you go about using this ability, but it does have an extra advantage, which is that it also grants immunity to roots and slows, so you have some CC resistance with the Royal Boots as well. And then we have our final boot in this category, which are the Demon Boots, which makes for the Vengeful Sprint ability. And this one is actually a very good sprint as well. Now the Demon Boots work with charges, and you start with 2 stacks by default whenever you use it. Looks like this. So at this moment I have 2 stacks, and for each stack I get 25% movement speed and a damage boost of 5%. However, for every 20% health you miss, you get an additional stack. Okay, so a bit of a weird cut, but I just went ahead and grabbed the Specter jacket to show what the Demon Boots would look like if I'm below 20% health, how fast I would be. But it only lasts for 20 seconds, so I don't lose enough health. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use it here. Alright, and we'll just show it with 1 additional stack, I guess. So let's quickly do that. I think we can make 1 stack. Yes, we can make 1 stack. Alright, so at this point, I'm below 80%. So this would make for 3 charges. And as you can see, the movement speed difference is already noticeable because I got 1 extra stack, which means I'm 25% faster. And just like that, for every 20% health you are missing, you get an additional stack. So once you are below 20% health, you should have 6 stacks. However, it says stacks up to 5 times here. That's new for me. I'm not really sure if it's a maximum of 5 now. Could be. But even at 5 stacks, you are looking at 125 movement speed for 5 seconds, which, just like the Soldier Boots and the Royal Boots, makes for a ton of mobility. Now, the Demon Boots also makes for some damage, which is just something extra. You don't really ever want to pop this for the damage buff it makes for. Just useful to have, I guess, in those certain situations. But especially the Demon Boots, because unlike the other 2, this one doesn't have to ramp up. This one isn't as vulnerable to purges. This one really makes for a solid panic button, especially when you are solo. So these 3 boots, the Soldier Boots, the Royal Boots, and the Demon Boots, really are the type of boots you want to take with you when you are doing solo adventures. So whenever you are going about the open world, the mists perhaps, but really places where you just need a ton of mobility because you don't know what kind of events you can expect out there. But outside of solo mists and outside of solo open world roams, you don't really use these boots that often. Maybe the Soldier Boots and maybe the Demon Boots for transport type of activities, and maybe the Royal Boots in corrupted dungeons as well, but primarily for the mists and open worlds whenever you are playing solo. And these are definitely not the type of boots you want to take to PvE content whatsoever. Then we have our next category of boots, which are the ones that make for blinks. Within that category, we have the Cleric Sandals, the Stalker shoes, and the Mage Sandals. So all three of these boots have a blink on them, basically a teleport. Looks like this for the Cleric Sandals. The Stalker shoes looks the same. It's also a blink, except this one has shorter range and it can be used twice back to back. And then you have the Mage Sandals, which also has a blink, but this one has a 1 second delay to it. So just to showcase the Stalker shoes, you can use it twice like this. The Stalker shoes also has an extra buff on it in that it increases your damage and healing cost. Both the Cleric Sandals and the Stalker shoes make you immune to damage and purges when you use the blink. As for the Mage Sandals, this one doesn't, but it does provide you extra damage resistances instead. Now, when it comes to blinks, these are the types of abilities that have a more specific type of use case. You will see blinks used a lot in ZVZ contents, which are the biggest fights in Albion Online. In such content, DPS will use blinks to instantly reach the enemy Zerg and do big hits. Tanks will use them as well to instantly close the gap and apply crowd control. Aside from ZVZ, you also see blink being used in a lot of instanced PvP content. Think of places like the Depths, Hellgates, and the Arenas, Crystal Arenas as well. But since blink doesn't make for a ton of mobility like the first three boots we covered, they are pretty limited in their use cases outside of those types of contents. And especially the combo of solo and open world, you don't really want to use a blink because it does leave you with very little mobility. So basically, if you know what kind of actions and enemies you can expect, in such cases the blink is very powerful. But outside of that, it simply doesn't provide enough mobility for you to use these types of shoes. And just to showcase you the delayed teleport ability as well, and this one can actually be used to fool your enemies a little, in which you can use it on the other side of where you actually want to run, which will look like something like this. So I'm going to make my enemies think I'm heading northeast, whereas I really want to go southwest, which is going to look something like this. And just like that, you can increase the gap, increase the distance between you and your enemies even more. What makes Blink so good is that aside from using them offensively to instantly hit enemies, you can also use it defensively to instantly dodge stuff. So when you are a bit more experienced in the game and you know when tanks are going to hit and use their heavy crowd controls, you can simply blink away from danger. So Blink is very good both offensively and defensively. Then we have our next category of shoes, which are the ones that make for dashes or jump type of abilities. In this category, we have the Royal shoes, the Mercenary shoes, and the Mistwalker shoes. All three of these are very different from each other, but they kind of do the same thing, starting with the Royal shoes, which makes for the evasive jump ability. Now, whenever you use this one, you basically leap towards the targeted position and you become immune to all damage, debuffs, and crowd control effects until you land. So this one is a very strong defensive type of mobility. Looks like this, and as you can see, you jump pretty far. And throughout that jump, you will simply become fully immune to everything. Then we have the Mercenary shoes, which has a dash on it. And this one actually removes all crowd control effects when you use it. It can be used while you are stunned or silenced as well, making it a full anti-CC, anti-crowd control type of ability. Looks like this, has quite some range to it as well, as you can see. And it's basically very similar to the Royal shoes, except for the fact you can also use it while you are CC'd already. And then we have the Mistwalker shoes, which makes for the after image ability. If you played League of Legends and you know LeBlanc, this ability will be very familiar for you, as it's simply a copy of one of her abilities. I think E was the chain, I think Q was the, what is it called, like the poke ability, so it has to be the W on LeBlanc's kit. Looks like this. You basically create an after image, which you can use again to go back to your original position like this. Now, if you walk too far with this ability, it will cancel, so you won't be able to go back to your starting position. But aside from that, the only thing you need to know is that you are not required to go back to your position. So depending on whether you actually need to return or not, depending on the enemy's position as well, you can use this ability either once or twice, just like that. Now, these three abilities basically make for dashes, in which this one and this one especially are the ones you want to use defensively, and the Mistwalker shoes can be used both offensively as well as defensively. You will see the Mistwalker shoes a lot in ZVZ type of content, where heavy hitting DPS will use that ability to go into the enemy Zerg, do a ton of DPS, and instantly go back to their starting position where they are safe. The Royal Shoes surprisingly sees quite some ZVZ play as well lately, especially used by a lot of tanks. As for the general usage of these boots, you will see them used a lot in different types of instanced PvP content, such as the Depths, Hellgates, and Crystal Arenas. But once again, just like the Blink abilities, they are not your typical go-to mobility type of boots, because especially in the open world, you just need a ton of mobility, and these boots simply don't make for that. Although you can break free with the Mercenary shoes from the initial crowd control, you won't really increase the distance between you and whatever enemies you are facing, so you won't have any real mobility to actually get away from danger. Therefore, these boots, although they are very good and have very unique abilities, they do belong in certain types of content. The Royal Shoes, for example, is also very popular in PvE type of content, because the tank can simply negate a lot more damage with the usage of this ability. But outside of ZVZ type of content and outside of instanced PvP type of content, you won't see these boots that often. Then we have our next category of boots, which are the ones that make for invisibility. In that category, we have the shoes of Tenacity and we have the Specter shoes. Both of these shoes have a pretty niche use case, especially the Specter shoes. This one basically turns you invisible for as long as you channel it, and since it has 1 minute cooldown and it drains your energy every half a second, you basically can use this ability only once in any given situation. So once you activate the Spectral Run ability, you become invisible, and as you can see, you channel it for quite some time. It's 16 seconds, I believe, so you can remain invisible for a very long duration, but at some point you will get 0 energy and it will have another 45 seconds on its cooldown. Therefore, you can really only use this ability once. And although an invisibility like this sounds very strong, it has very specific use cases. So it's definitely not one of your go-to boots. However, if you do need to skip mobs in PvE, or if you are transporting, this could be one of your options. Definitely not my favorite option. I still prefer something with a lot of mobility, but there are a lot of people that transport in the most dangerous zones and use this ability because it makes for such a long invisibility. Now keep in mind, taking damage does end this channel, so you need to be absolutely sure you are safe from any kind of damage enemies do. Therefore, although it sounds pretty strong, it is a pretty easy ability to counter. Another way you could use the Specter shoes is to cast it and then run up to an enemy who doesn't expect you. However, keep in mind that your energy does go down very fast, and also once you run more than 15 meters, all of your damage will be decreased by 50%. So keep that in mind if you ever plan to sneak up on people with the Specter shoes. Now the second pair of boots that makes for an invisibility is the shoes of Tenacity, which works very differently from the Specter shoes. Now this one makes for the blind spot ability, which has a very low cooldown. So this is the type of boot you can use very often through a PvP fight. Now this one only makes you invisible for 1.5 seconds, so it's a tiny invisibility window where you also get a decent boost to your movement speed. So although the effect of this one is very short, so is the cooldown, making for an ideal ability, especially in 1v1 type of content. Now once you proc these boots, you also get a damage buff for 3 seconds, in that the next attack you do will do some additional damage. So normally I hit for 45, and once I proc these boots, I do 133 damage in between, just like that, which is quite some damage on top of everything else this boot has going on already. Very niche use case. You won't see the shoes of Tenacity that often, but if you are to see it anywhere, it's probably somewhere in like corrupted dungeons, maybe with very specific builds, maybe in some of the instanced PvP content as well, but definitely not something you see outside of those contents. One final use case of the shoes of Tenacity is that because of the low cooldown and because it has an invisibility to it, people use them in ratting type of content. So basically think of static dungeon rats, where they just want to get deep into those dungeons to reach enemy players, while also being able to reset all the mobs. In our next category, we have only one boot, and that's because the rush ability of the Hunter Shoes is very unique in what it does. Whenever you use this ability, you get a huge burst in movement speed for 3 seconds, throughout which your crowd control effects are increased by 35%. So especially when you are playing something like an engaged tank and your job is to catch enemy players, you can just use this sprint, and with the additional crowd control effects it makes for CC enemies for a very long time. Not only will they be stunned or silenced or rooted for longer, but they also won't see you coming as you are simply very fast with the Hunter Shoes for a few seconds. So a very strong and unique ability, but pretty limited in its usage in that you don't really take the Hunter Shoes unless you are playing a heavy crowd control type of role. Up next, we have another category with only one boot in it, this time with the Royal Sandals. Now, this ability has a very huge advantage to it in that it's a toggle ability. So once you use it, people cannot interrupt it and people cannot get rid of it in any way. Even if they use purges, they will simply waste it because it's a toggle, because it cannot be removed. So if you want some mobility that doesn't really have counterplay to it, this one is an excellent pick. It basically makes for a guaranteed sprint. While you use the Defenseless Rush ability, not only does your movement speed increase, but also the damage you do. However, just like you get a damage boost, you also receive more damage because your defenses are decreased by the same percentage. So keep that in mind if you ever decide to take the Royal Sandals. As for what kind of content the Royal Sandals is used in, it's used in a lot of different content starting from 1v1 all the way to the biggest ZVZs. A very versatile item that can be used in a lot of different content within the game. In our next category of boots, we have the Boots of Valor, the Graveguard boots, the Sandals of Purity, and the Scholar Sandals. And if you know the game a little, you can already guess that this is the anti-CC, anti-crowd control category. Now, all 4 of these boots simply make for sprints, so let's equip the Boots of Valor. But aside from giving you a sprint, they also come with various conditions and anti-crowd control bonuses. Now, something interesting about this category is that the Boots of Valor pretty much is an upgraded Graveguard boots, and the Sandals of Purity is pretty much an upgraded Scholar Sandals. Therefore, in the current meta, you don't really see the Graveguard boots, nor do you see the Scholar Sandals. Especially the Scholar Sandals, I haven't seen being used for a very long time now. With the other two, both Boots of Valor and Sandals of Purity are very popular. Boots of Valor is more popular in the bigger fights, and the Sandals of Purity are more widely used in smaller content. Whenever you use the Sandals of Purity, you become immune to all roots and slows, and you get a movement speed buff while you are channeling, which means that you cannot undertake any other actions whilst you are popping these boots. Now, since it is a channel, it can be interrupted, so it does come with certain disadvantages. You cannot use anything and you can be interrupted. However, it only has 10 seconds cooldown. So by the time you're finished with it, you're already almost at half the cooldown and you can spam this ability quite often back to back. The Boots of Valor, on the other hand, is a bit more complex. Whenever you use this ability, you have your movement speed increased by a little, but more importantly, you become immune to all forced movement effects. Which explains why this ability is so popular in ZVZ type of content, where the forced movement effect immunity is just super important to have. If you get stunned, rooted, or slowed whilst this ability is active, this ability will actually get replaced by an ability that cleanses all crowd control effects on you, and then it increases your movement speed by 120%, which is a huge amount of movement speed, and you also become immune to all future CC. So the Boots of Valor simply makes for a lot of anti-CC with a lot of mobility perks on top of that. So if you want boots with anti-CC perks on them when you are solo or playing in a small group, the Sandals of Purity is your choice to go. And whenever you are talking about bigger content, you want to go with the Boots of Valor. The other two boots, Graveguard boots and Scholar Sandals, aren't even worth mentioning because they are simply weaker versions of the ones we just went over. Up next, we have a category of boots that have a requirement. Now, in this category, we have the Assassin Shoes, the Hellion Shoes, Knight Boots, and Fiend Sandals. If you already know what kind of requirement these boots have, write it in the comments below. I'm really curious to how many experienced players are watching these types of videos, Because it is pretty interesting that although the boot slot primarily makes for mobility, the requirement of these four especially sometimes leave you without any mobility at all. And that requirement is that you need to have a target selected to use these abilities. Starting with the Assassin's Shoes, you have the Swift Cut ability, which simply requires you to have a target selected. Doesn't matter if it's a player or a mob, but you need to have someone selected, otherwise you cannot use this ability. But once you have someone selected and you use it, you basically dash behind them and you deal some extra damage through your boot's ability. As for the second boot, the Hellion Shoes, once again you need to have a target selected. This one actually makes you invisible for a couple seconds when you use it. And while you are invisible, you basically channel this ability, after which you dash to the selected target. Now this ability looks like this. You need to be in range to use it, but once you activate it, you can walk around freely. And once you have the channel complete, you will dash to the target, and you will increase your own damage by 35% for 4 seconds. So both the Assassin's Shoes as well as the Hellion Shoes make for a dash on the target you have selected, which both come with damage bonuses. So both of these boots are very offensive picks. Now, one thing you need to know about the Hellion Shoes is that you can also use it on allies. I haven't used these ones for a very long time now, so I'm not really sure if they changed that. But if it's like it used to be, you can also use it on allies as well, aside from enemy players. Then we have the Knight Boots, which also requires a target to utilize, and this one can be used both on an enemy as well as an ally. Whenever you use the shield charge of the Knight Boots, you charge towards the target and you apply a shield on yourself. If the selected target is an ally, they also benefit from the shield, as they will also be provided their own shield. Looks like this, and as you can see, it makes for a pretty big shield. So basically, the Knight Boots are the defensive option within this category. And then you have the Fiend Sandals, which makes for the position swap teleport, in which you also need to have a target selected. Once again, can be an enemy or an ally. If it is an enemy, you will also interrupt whatever spells they are casting. But basically, whenever you use this ability, you will swap positions with whoever you have selected. So this ability can be very useful to pull an enemy back into your team, or to save an ally from big hits. However, if you go about playing Superman and saving your allies, don't forget that you get in their position and you will take the damage they would instead. So make sure not to put yourself in any kind of danger whatsoever. As for the use case of these 4 abilities, you are primarily looking at instanced PvP type of content. Just like all the other boots that have limited mobility, these aren't the best picks for the open world, as once you use these boots, you will be left without any real mobility. Therefore, you will be very vulnerable when you use them in the open world. Doesn't mean you cannot use them in the open world whatsoever. You most certainly can, but you just need to be extra careful. Nonetheless, 4 options that are very solid picks for instance content, such as Corrupted Dungeons, Hellgates, Depths, and Arenas, but also the Assassin's Shoes, especially very popular in the Mists as well. Up next, we have another boot that's solo in its own category. We have the Guardian Boots, and I have to say, I'm once again looking at a boot that I haven't really seen used for a very long time now. The Guardian Boots basically makes for the giant ability, which looks like this. As you can see, your character grows in size, but also your health doubles in size as well. Both your current health as well as your max health are increased by 100%, making you far more tankier for the 6 seconds this buff is active for. It also comes with the tiniest boost to mobility. However, that's definitely not what you take this ability for. Now, one good thing about this ability is that it cannot be purged. So once someone activates this ability, you just have to accept they just became double as healthy. Now, in my opinion, you definitely want to have some sort of mobility on your boot slot, and the Guardian Boots don't really make for that, which is why the Guardian Boots have a very niche use case. You pretty much will only see the Guardian Boots in the Corrupted Dungeons with very specific builds, but outside of that, I haven't really ever seen the Guardian Boots being used. Then we have our next category, where once again we have a solo boot because it's a very unique ability once more. This time we have the Feyscale Sandals with the Ethereal form. Now, this boot also has a very limited use case, but within the content it's used, it does make for a very strong mobility tool. The Feyscale Sandals are primarily used in ZVZ content by very specific builds. You're basically looking at the type of build that needs to get into the enemy Zerg, do a lot of damage, and disappear at once. Because when you use this ability, after 2 seconds, you turn into a ghost and you simply become untargetable, you become immune to everything. And as you pass through enemies whilst this ability is active, your movement speed gets increased by a lot, making for a safe return towards your own Zerg after doing a lot of damage on the enemy side. Outside of ZVZ and outside of those very specific builds, however, I've never seen someone use the Feyscale Sandals. Not saying that you cannot use it, you know, I've always thought this could be a pretty decent option whenever you go about transporting, but I simply haven't ever seen this boot being used outside of ZVZ. Then we have 2 categories left, starting with the debuffs, in which we have the Cultist Sandals and we have the Druid Sandals. Starting with the Cultist Sandals, we have the Rotten Ground ability, which makes for a tiny increase to movement speed, but more importantly, it makes for a trail that reduces the enemy resistances and reduces the healing they receive. So the Rotten Ground ability, which looks like this, it literally looks like a rotten ground, makes for a very nasty debuff. Cultist Sandals is mostly used in instanced PvP type of content, think of Hellgates and Depths, and arenas as well. Outside of that, some builds in ZVZs use that as well, especially the Carving Sword, because on the Carving Sword you also have some mobility on your W and Q, which kind of makes up for the little mobility this one makes for. And since the Carving Sword is all about piercing your enemy, this one simply makes for additional damage resistance debuffs as well as healing received debuffs. But the Cultist Sandals are primarily used in instanced PvP type of content. Now, the Cultist Sandals are also very popular in PvE content, as the debuff applies there as well. So whenever you are doing group dungeons, you can simply have someone or even 2 people take the Rotten Ground and clear your PvE faster. Then we have the Druid Sandals, which once again is an item I haven't seen being used for a very long time now. Whenever you pop this ability, you once again leave a trail, this time one that slows the enemies behind you. Unlike the Cultist Sandals, this one makes for decent movement speed, but not enough to justify taking it. If you were to take the Druid Sandals, it would be for PvP only. I can see it being good in instance PvP content as usual, but outside of that, it just doesn't bring enough mobility or value to actually take these boots. Therefore, if you want to experiment with the Druid Sandals in instance PvP content such as the Hellgates, the Depths, or arenas, go ahead, but otherwise just go with any of the other boots because they bring far more value. And finally, we have the last category of boots, which includes the Judicator boots and Duskweaver boots. And this one is actually really funny because I've never seen someone use the Duskweaver boots. Not once in my life. I've played this game for so long now, and I have not seen this boot on a single person. And the craziest thing is, the Duskweaver boots are actually the newest addition to the game. Wait, let me say that correctly. Maybe the boots of Valor were added after that. I'm not entirely sure. I think the Duskweaver boots were the final edition. But it's crazy that basically no one ever has used this boot. If I am wrong, please let me know in the comments below, because I am very surprised that not even once I've run into these boots in all the different content I've done over the years. However, let's start with the one we do know, which are the Judicator boots, which makes for the elbow smash ability, which makes for a dash, looks like this. And basically, whenever you reach your location or position, you knock everyone up with this ability. Therefore, the Judicator boots, once again, an ability that doesn't really make for much mobility and is very limited in its use case. Primarily used in instanced PvP content, especially group PvP content. So you're looking at places such as the arenas and Hellgates. But outside of those instanced competitive PvP type of content, you don't really see the Judicator boots anywhere else. And then we have the Duskweaver boots. And like I said before, I've not seen a single soul in Albion Online ever use these boots. When these boots actually came out, I thought they would be like an upgrade to the Judicator boots, but reality showed no one is really interested in this boot whatsoever. Nonetheless, whenever you use this ability, you are supposed to dash to the targeted position, knocking all enemies you pass through in the charge direction. Like, I simply don't have any experience with this boot whatsoever. I'm not gonna lie against you guys. But basically, it's supposed to knock people back. And if the knocked back enemies collide with the environment, they will be stunned for 3.5 seconds. Although the stun on this one sounds very interesting, it is very difficult to pull that condition off, which is probably why this boot isn't that popular. Now, if any of you guys do have more experience with this boot, what kind of content it's used in, or maybe you use it yourself, let me know in the comments, because I am very interested about the use cases of this boot. Nonetheless, I will show you what it looks like. Looks like this. Really slow ability, pretty cool nonetheless, but not something I have any experience with. And that covers all the different boots in Albion Online. I hope you liked this video. If you do, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. And make sure to check out the other episodes if you haven't yet, where we went over all the different helmets, as well as all the different armors within the game. This was the last episode of the Albion Armor Breakdown series. Up next, I'll work on some other videos, such as econ videos, as well as build videos. Basically, how to progress in Albion Online whilst having fun. But at some point, I'll definitely cover the capes, all the consumables, and all the mounts as well. And sometime after that, I'll start diving deep into the different weapons within the game too. Hope you got some value out of this video. If you enjoyed it, if you learned anything from this video, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.